Okay, good morning. Today's share is sponsored Le'ilu Nishmas Chaim Israel ben Shmuel Shmelka, Nasham Shev and Aliyah. Thank you. Okay, I want to talk about today. The title was Haman's Jewish grandchildren. So let's talk about Haman's Jewish grandchildren. It's Batsim Mumfur Gemara that I think a lot of people are familiar with. There's a lot of room in a room worth discussing. I would like to start with a little bit of a historical episode, like a little sidebar historical episode that in my mind is connected to this. I could be wrong. If it's not, then I apologize in advance. There's during the mid 1600s, like 1670-ish, the government of Vienna, which was the Austro-Hungarian Empire, evicted all the Jews from the whole Austro-Hungarian Empire, from the Holy Roman Empire they called themselves. Very few Jews were allowed to stay behind. You had to have like some sort of major connections to be able to stay behind and be in Vienna. One of the Jews who was able to stay behind was a person by the name of Shmuel Oppenheimer. I don't believe he was a Talmid Chacham. I think he was a Pashina Mensch. He was a simple person. He was a big Gvir. He was a tremendous Gvir, Shmuel Oppenheimer. And he got special permission from King Leopold to stay behind in Vienna after the Jews were expelled. And he was like a early dmus of an Askin, like a real Askin. He was able to help Jews. What did he say? Yeah. He was able to help Jews in all sorts of very dire predicaments. His main claim to fame was that he financed the money that the Viennese, the Habsburg Empire needed to wage war against the Ottomans. And since there was like a constant war that was going on, he financed millions and millions of gold coins for the empire. And because of that, he had a particularly powerful spot. Now it happens to be that by the time he died, the Viennese government owed him 5 million gold coins or Reichsmarks or whatever they called them. And the minute he died, they canceled the debt. They said that his bank went bankrupt and they refused to pay it to his son. So his son did not have the money that he had. The bank that he owned, that he founded, was the bank that Mayor Amschel Rothschild trained in. So all the Rothschild banking, the Jewish banking in Europe at the time, was trained under Shmuel Oppenheimer. So he's like a very big financier and Askin in Europe at the time. Now, one of the things that he successfully, or somewhat successfully, accomplished was as follows. This is what the interesting part to me is. There was a guy. His name was Johannes Eisenmenger. That's his name. Johannes Andreas Eisenmenger. He was a German boy, a little Yassam Yingel, who grew up in Germany. And at a certain point in his life, he seemed to have become, as a young man, probably in his 20s. I spoke about him briefly somewhere else, but I'll just, in his 20s, it seems he became enamored of the Jews, and he decided that he wanted to convert. And for the next 17 years or 19 years, he went to live in Amsterdam in a pretty open-minded Jewish community, a wealthy Jewish community. And now this Chilukei Deis is exactly what happened. Some say that he actually converted. He mamish converted, he became a Jew, he lived as a Jew. Others say he didn't actually convert, but he lived as a Jew in preparation for conversion for many, many years, close to 2 decades. He lived in Amsterdam, either pretending or actually being a Jew. Now, it's unclear what went wrong, what went off the rails, but he lived in Hindenheim and then in Amsterdam, and he became very close to a rabbi by the name of David Lida, who was a prolific Mechaber Svarim. David Lida probably put out like 20 Svarim. He became close to David Lida. At some point, something went wrong in his relationship with David Lida. He heard David Lida, I think the way he recalls it at least, David Lida told him over a shlah that says that the Sar of the Catholics is the Sar of Gehenim. He was very triggered by that idea. Also, he writes that he witnessed several conversions taking place in his vicinity, and this triggered him, and because of these things, he fell off the wagon. He leaves the Jewish community of Amsterdam, and he goes and writes a book, like a 2,000-page long book, called Judaism Uncovered. The German title I won't even try to pronounce, but he wrote a book called Judaism Uncovered, Judaism Unmasked, and in it he explains how Judaism is so terrible and all the bad ideas that are in it and all the terrible things that it says in the Talmud and etc. Now, what was unique about him that made it have such sticking power was that he finished Shas 3 times. He was Messiah Shas 3 times. He was a Shlichut Talmid Chacham. He lived, like we said, and operated as a Jew for quite a while. And in his book, even though the book was in German, he was able to put quotes like in the actual Aramaic, the original Talmud thing with translation, with Haggayis and Hasagis and etc. So it came off as a very academic, sophisticated product. Meaning he didn't look like just some two-bit anti-Semite who was just throwing things at the wall. What do you say? Yeah, no. And today's anti-Semites, whether b'yodim or b'lo yodim, are relying on Eisenmenger's research. A lot of the lists of things that are wrong with the Talmud and a lot of the tinus that they have come directly from Eisenmenger, from his book, from the year 1700. Now, so what ended up happening is that Shmuel Oppenheimer petitioned King Leopold to ban the book before it was ever published and not allow it to be published. Successfully in the areas that King Leopold controlled, but Eisenmenger's children, posthumously, Eisenmenger dies in 1704, his children are able to print it in a different vicinity, several thousand copies, eventually several thousand more, and it gets translated into more languages, etc., etc. And the book, survives till today. Like one of Eisenmenger's greatest hits is, for example, in Aleinu, a lot of the old story used to have it in parentheses or brackets, Shem Ispal and Lehevel Varik. Now, Eisenmenger, in his book, Judaism Uncovered, suggests that Shem Ispal and Lehevel Varik is the same gematria as Yeshu, and that's why it's in there. He's the one who was mechadish that. Now, the truth is that Eisenmenger, who knew Navi very well, knew that it's a pasuk in Yeshaya that says Lehevel Varik, and it has nothing to do with Yeshu. It comes several hundred years before him. But that was just one. For example, Eisenmenger proves that blood libels are legitimate. The blood libel at that point was a 400 or 500-year-old legend, but no one could really learn Gemara and etc. Eisenmenger proves that no, there's Makairis for it and whatever. Now, a lot of it is very, not a lot of it, all of it is very faulty and full of lies, but it's done in a sophisticated manner that gave it like a lot of sticking power. Nastam, as an aside, Reb Shmuel Oppenheimer had a nephew by the name of Reb David Oppenheimer, who was the Rav of Prague. He was one of the Gedolim, who had one of the most consequential, substantial libraries in Europe, probably ever. He had like 7,000 Svarim, I think was the number, plus all sorts of obscure Kisvei Yadis from the Ottoman Empire. Due to his uncle's banking connections, he was able to get a hold of things. And even though the family eventually didn't stay as wealthy as they were under Reb Shmuel Oppenheimer, but the library survived. It was passed on to Oxford University, and it became it's one of the main sources of research. And even in Kisvei Yadis and Svarim today, the Bodleian Library in Oxford was Reb David Oppenheimer's library, financed by his uncle Shmuel Oppenheimer. So there is a legacy to these Oppenheimer riches. Now, in any case, the reason why I'm mentioning Johannes Eisenmenger in this context is because Johannes Eisenmenger is to me an example of someone who has something so wrong, b'shrasha, something so broken deep inside, that even though he seems to have made a commitment and became a ger for many years, was on board, something wasn't able to hold. Something eventually came apart, and he turns out to be the biggest sinner that the Jews could have. So maybe this is not the pshat in the Mechilta that we're going to talk about now, but maybe it is the pshat in the Mechilta. So I wanted to just use that as a framing. Now, what I want to discuss is as follows. There's a Mechilta in the end of Parshas B'Shalach that says as follows. I want to read the whole Mechilta. It's 3 different shittas. The third one is the one that we need to discuss, but the Mechilta says as follows. It says, the pasuk says, "Vayomer ki yad al keis ya mulchama l'Hashem ba'amalek midar dar." Rabbi Shua says, "Yeshiv HaKadosh Baruch Hu al kisei malchusay." When Hashem will return to his kisei malchus, v'tim mamlachtei ba'is yishal mulchama l'Hashem ba'amalek. When Hashem's kingdom will be well established and will be settled, then there'll be a battle between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and with Amalek. That's the day Rishonah. Rav Elazar HaMidai says, "Nishba HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'kisei hakavod shelo yamaniach nin v'nechad shel Amalek tachas mifras kol hashemayim." Hashem makes a shvua in the kisei hakavod that he's not going to leave over a single nin v'nechad to the Amaleki nation. Shel yomru gamol zeh shel Amalek. If I leave over anything to Amalek, people, just like we find by Mrs. Bezdin, by killing an animal that was engaged in Avera, we can't leave over. Hashem says, I'm not going to leave over any remnants to Amalek. Rav Eliezer says, Nishba hamakom b'kisei hakavod shelo, and this is the shita that's important to us. Shem yava yachad mikol u'misayelu. If anybody comes from any of the nations of the world, l'sgari to become a ger, sheikablu, you should accept him. Ula Amalek u'lebeisai lo yikablu. To Amalek and his household, you shouldn't accept him. Shenemar, vayirmi David alanar hamagid loy. The story that we just learned in Haftarah, David tells the Nar who told him the information, Amy Zata, where are you from? Vayomer ben ishkar Amaleki anachi. I'm an Amaleki. So it says, Niskar David, this is the Mechilta talking. Niskar David, at that point, David Melech remembered Ba'is Shah, Masha Amr Moshe Rabbeinu, what was told to Moshe Rabbeinu, Yavei Echad Mikalu Moshe Ba'ilum Liskayer, Sheikablu, Mibeis Shal Amalek, Shalai Kablu, Miyad Vayomer Lev David, Damchal Roshcha, Kipicha Anabucha, Lekach Nemer Midar Dar. So this is the Mechilta. Mechilta brings the day from Rav Eliezer. This is the third day that the Hashem made a shvua that no Amalekim are to be accepted into Klal Yisrael, and therefore anyone who comes from Megayah we can accept except for Amalekim. When David HaMelech bumped into this Ger Amaleki in the story that we learned in Haftarah, David HaMelech kills him and says, Picha ancha b'cha, your own mouth is what got you in trouble. Now this is what the Mechilta says. Now the shaila is, are these three things in the Mechilta like kilu, two different dais in the same yisod. Like we're trying to explain how vayt the mechia has to go, how much of a destruction of the name of Amalek has to come. And these are three examples of it. Are these machliksim? Do they not agree with each other? Now, putting this, so let's put this mechilta aside. The problem is as follows: the Ein Yaakov from the Mechaber, the Shvus Yaakov in Sanhedrin of Tzadik Vav and Beis, he has a kasha as follows. There's a Gemara in Gittin Daf Nun Vav and Sanhedrin Tzadik Zayin that says as follows. It's a famous Gemara. The Gemara says like this. The Gemara really says it's a shtickle list, like a hit list. Let me just read the whole Gemara. The Gemara says like this. It says. One second. I don't know where it is a second, but the Gemara says, the Gemara brings it to, the Gemara says, Tana, Mibnei Banav shall, it brings Sancherev, it brings a few of the greatest enemies of Klal Yisrael, Titus, Sancherev, Haman, Naaman, some of the biggest enemies of Klal Yisrael. It says how some of their progeny, or some of them themselves, became closer to the Jewish people. Now the Gemara over there says, Mibnei Banav shall Haman ha'yolem b'm Torah b'bnei Brak. This is the Gemara in two places in Shas. The Gemara is pretty specific, pretty particular. It says, Mibnei Banav shall Haman, the children's children of Haman. Now we have to know if Bnei Banav means, we'll see in the Mefarshim exactly, but Bnei Banav shall Haman, the children of Haman, lamdu Torah b'bnei Brak. They learn Torah b'bnei Brak. Now the problem is that according to the Mechilta, that you can't accept Gerim. How are we to make sense of this appearance of Haman's children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren in Yeshiva? So the Shvus Yaakov asks like this. He says as follows. He says, Manav shel Haman ha'yolamdim Torah b'bnei Brak. V'yadua shehaman hu mizera Amalek. He says, Yadua that Haman is mizera Amalek. Now what's interesting is I think we assume this, that Haman is mizera Amalek. That's an obvious no-brainer, right? Haman ben Hamdasa Agagi. The Gemara in Megillah says Mi Mishpachas Agag. That's why he has the name Agagi. But if you look in the Pirkei Belazar and the Psikta and the Masechta Seferim, there are many other girsayos that seem to say that Haman might not have been a bloodline of an Amaleki. Haman might have been an adopted Amaleki. He was so enthralled with the ideology that he got on board and became an honorable member, but he might not have even been. But let's just read the girsa. The Shvus Yaakov brings this girsa. He says as follows: Kedisim Masechta Seferim, Haman ben Hamadasa Agagi, Bar Biza. It's not too many days, like 10 days. Bar Horam, Bar Hordis, Bar Seger, Bar Nagar, Bar Parmashta, Bar Vazasa, Bar Amalek, Bar Elifaz, Bar Esav. That's Haman Zichas. So he brings from the Masechta Sefer from a particular list of Haman Zichas. There are other days and exactly how we calculate Haman Zichas, but this is the day that the Masechta Sefer brings down. And Frek the Shvus Yaakov every day says, I don't understand. He says, Kaimulam b'Sanhedrin Dafnun Testament Aleph, Akum Shaisik v'Torah Chayiv Misa. We hold it some Mefurish Gemara in Sanhedrin that a guy who learns Torah is Chayiv Misa. Shenemar, Torah Tziv Moshe, Torah Tziv Lanu Moshe Meirasha, Lanu Meirasha v'Leilahem. It's our inheritance, it's not their inheritance. But Gemara Chayiv Dafidim Omer Aleph, Amar Vami Ein Moshe Divrei Torah L'Goy. You're not allowed to give over there. Shenemar Magdor L'Yaakov. So the Kashalem with the Bnei Brak Ir Shacham v'Seifrim. Yinegu Shalei Kedin. He says it's not mistaver that Bnei Brak, which was the Ir Chacham v'Seifrim, would take a shegitz into yeshiva and go connected the Gemara Sanhedrin, the Gemara Chagiga. They would just take someone in. Elisha b'Hechrach Giru I say. Muzdach Zayin, they were Megayah this person. That's why they were teaching him learning. So Habehachar the Mut Legayah Gerim is Amalek, Nishbet and then he blind Sarachin. The Shvus Yaakov asks, I don't understand. The Mechilta brings a Eliezer Deya that says Mikalu Umas you could accept Gerim, but you can't accept Gerim from Amalek. Lamaisa, there's a Gemara that says Mebanav Shalom Lam Torah b'Bnei Brak. Because of the Gemara Chagiga and the Gemara Sanhedrin, it can't be that they were teaching a Shegit's Torah, so it has to be that they were teaching him because he was a Ger. If he's a Ger, I don't understand that the Mechilta works with this Gemara. This is the Shvus Yaakov's kasha.
Why can we his children will go about Yisrael?
Oh, sure. So there's a sefer called Ner Lameya from a guy who used to live in Bar Park. I think he's the one who actually put out that sefer about the Beis Yosef's kashas. Today the Beis Yosef's kashas is up to 500. We're not up to 100 anymore. Yeah, exactly. So there used to be 100 through him. So he has one on Purim also, Ner Lameya on Purim also on this kasha, and he collected 100 through him. So anything you want to think of is true, has a kernel of truth. It might not be the final Torah, it's the actual Torah. Each one of them has kashas through him. Now I just want to start going order here. So the way to start over here is the Chida in Ein Zeicher. What do you say? Everything that.
Yeah, but where does it rank?
Hang on. So let's just go in order here. The Ein Zeicher, the Chida in Ein Zeicher, and in two places. It could be more. He says that there's a machlekes hasugis. Good morning. He says there's a machlekes hasugis between the Mechilta and the Gemara Gittin. These two things can't stem with each other. The Gemara Gittin and the Gemara and the Mechilta do not stem with each other. And vice versa, that like we hold, we don't pass on like a Belazar Shamutihu. We don't pass on like a Belazar Mela. Agam Reb Elazar and the Mechilta Taka, Reb Eliezer and the Mechilta Taka says this. He says ain't Mekabel Gerim, but from the Gemara it's Muchach that yes, we are Mekabel Gerim. And if you want to know where in the ranking of Terutzim it goes, that's probably the highest rank. highest rank is that's probably machlekes. These two things don't have to shim with each other. It's possible that they don't agree with each other. And the Chazon Ish in Yeridea learns like this. The Chazon Ish has another layer of a chilik, but he learns like this. That's probably the simplest teretz. Now, we already mentioned briefly that there are some deists in the Amoraim that Haman was not a natural born Amaleki. Haman was just an adopted Amaleki. If Haman was an adopted Amaleki, so just like it, rinse on, rinse off. It's not. He doesn't have to keep it. His kids don't have to keep it. They might have learned the lesson and fell off the Amaleki yichas. So those are the easiest ones. Now, just Stam. Another easy one is the Shemishmol, the Sachachava. He writes that this Gemara in Gittin, this Gemara in Sanhedrin, is an Agadat the Gemara. And the Shvus Yaakov and the Manas Alevi, he asks it also, are treating it like a halacha gemara. It's not a halacha gemara. He says there was no human, an actual person who had like a yichus buch that showed him to be an anikel of Haman who came to be a ger. It just means of like the nitzaitis of Haman got a kapara in Bnei Brak, meaning the universe came to shleimus. The Shem Shmuel explains it much more kabbalistically, much more in Agadat sense. And he says it's not an actual person. Actually, these are all terutzim that kill like a misalik the kasha mekar. If you go like the chida, there's no kasha because the machlek is a sugis. If you say Haman wasn't really an amaleki, which is again keneged a gemara, but there's other mekaris that sound like that. The guy in Grad is Mashana, the Gerson, and Sefim, he does not, he holds like the Gemara, but actually there is days that hold like that, so then you have another Eitzor, if you say like the Shem Shmuel, the Sachachava, so there's no real kasha, this is not but if there's a kasha, if the Mechilta is supposed to shim with this Gemara Gittin, if these two things have to shim, so what's the Eitzor? Now, there's a beautiful Avnei Nezer, tshuva from Avnei Nezer, it's a Sachachava, I didn't even think about that, Shem Shmuel, but there's a beautiful tshuva from Avnei Nezer. I want to go through it a little, and we'll see if there's maybe a teretz to be had from it, maybe not. But Avnei Nezer is as follows. It's a tshuva in Archaim Chelik Beis in tshuva Tafkov Ches. He brings as follows. Now he starts with a bit of a different angle. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim in I think it's Parak Vav in Hilchos Malachim Halacha Aleph through Daled. The Rambam describes what a war looks like, what a Jewish war looks like. And the Rambam is describing the issue, the din that the pasuk says, "Upasachta aleim l'shalom." That when you fight a battle, when Klal Yisrael fights a battle, they have to first offer peace. Now here's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says, "Ein oisen milchama im adam ba'olam." Ad shekarin le'shalim. Echad milchemes rishos, echad milchemes mitzvah. We don't make a battle with someone unless we offer them to have peace. Whether it's milchemes mitzvah, whether it's milchemes rishos, we don't make a battle. Im mishlimu v'kiblu sheva mitzvah shenitztavu b'brinayach aleim ein hargen mehem neshama. V'arein lamas shenemar yil chalamas v'avaducha. V'avdu sheyikablu hu shiu nivzim v'shveilu l'mata v'le'yirimu rosh b'Yisrael liyu kfushim tachas yadam. The avdus that they have to accept is Evet Kanani, to be a Ger Toshev, Evet Kanani, maybe more Ger Toshev, not Evet Kanani, Ger Toshev, to be under Klal Yisrael's auspices, to pay tribute and to not be too haughty. If they're not maskim, or they're not maskim to accept the mitzvahs, then we make battle with them. Then he says, Bamedvar more Mechamas Rishos, Shuam Shar Ha'umas, Aval Shiva Ammin V'Amalek Shalei Yishlimu, Ein Menichem Mehem Neshama. So the Rambam, when he's finishing saying what happens when you fight with someone, he says if someone doesn't agree, so you kill all the men. But that's only talking about Mechamas Rishos. But Mechamas Mitzvah, like Shiva Ammin or Amalek, where there's a mitzvah of Hachrim, Hachrim Tachrimim, and like we just learned, you're supposed to Machatimcha, those things, you kill all the Manashim, Nashim, V'Taf. Ein Menichem Mehem Neshamas. And V'cheinu Oim B'Amalek, Timcha Zecher Amalek. That's what the Rambam ends off. Now over here, you have a big problem. The Rambam, and this the Ravid points this out, and the Kesef Mishnah points this out, seems to be holding that even by Amalek there's an option to not destroy them. Even though it says Tim Chazech Amalek is supposed to destroy them, it sounds like that's if they're not willing to get on board. If they're willing to get on board, they're willing to shtotzu. It sounds like there's a situation where they could survive. Now the Avnei Nezer enters on this. The Avnei Nezer is writing on this Rambam, and it's like a shver Rambam. The Rambam sounds like by Amalek also there's some sort of hashlama that you could come to. Now the kasha is, and the Avnei Nezer starts like this. He says as follows. He says, where did the Rambam learn this din? He starts with where did the Rambam learn the din that it's shaykh to have hashlama with Zayin mitzvahs and with Zayin Amim and with Amalek? It says Machadimchi, he's supposed to destroy it. Where did the Rambam get the idea? So first he starts off trying to say, okay, the first teretz is whatever. He makes a tushtel, some sort of kavachaymer from Zayin Amim. Let's leave that aside. Then he brings as follows. He brings something interesting. He brings a Tanad Be'elio, and this is like it's a quasi halachic, quasi not halachic. He brings Tanad Be'elio and says as follows. The Tanad Be'elio in Parak Chavtal says like this: Tziva Eliphaz la'Amalek b'noi. Eliphaz, who's Esav's son and Amalek's father, so he's the missing link over here. He's the Baal Meseira. He's Mitzave's son Amalek as follows. He says, Sheyeda shelo Olam haba ein metoken el Yisrael. Olam haba you're not going to get anything from. There's no Olam haba for you. He says, Lech v'sayeya oisam v'chafiris be'eris u'chadayim v'tizkei moim. at least try to chapzich too with Klal Yisrael. Go help them, be some sort of assistant to them, and you'll get something with them. Now this is a classic case of good intentions with a bad outcome. When Amalek heard from his father Eliphaz that there's nothing he could do over here, he has no chelik, it turned him off completely, and he said, I become the biggest sign, I become the biggest enemy. So it says that in as follows. It says, Hine, Shizeu Shirish Chet Amalek, Shein Roitze B'Shum Panim Lias Nichna Liyisrael. The Yisoid of Amalek's hate to Klal Yisrael is that he doesn't want to be secondary. Amalek doesn't want to be subservient to Klal Yisrael. It says, Valkain, Avshem is Gayer, Ein Zeh Oid Hechacha Sheroitze B'Achna, Sherinasi Yisrael Ba'atzmai. It says, an Amaleki who comes to me Megayer, it's not advised that he's willing to find his proper role and shelter the Klal Yisrael. He's really just trying to become Klal Yisrael. He's like, if you can't beat him, join him. It's not a hachna. He's not showing to it. He says, that's the reason why we don't accept Gerim from Amalek. He says, this is why the Mechilta says you don't accept Gerim from Amalek, because it doesn't fix the problem. The problem with Amalek is that he doesn't want to see himself as secondary, as subservient, and he wants to be on the same level. Becoming a Ger doesn't fix that. He says, what does fix that is becoming a Ger Taishav. The way the Rambam describes in Hilchos Malachim what we're asking from the Amalek is that they should become subservient, they should become secondary, they should pay a tribute. That type of Zugestelltkeit, that does fix it. And if an Amaleki is willing to subject himself to that, then that shows that he's not Oiches Ma'aseh Avos B'Yadav, he's not following in the way, in his natural footsteps. Then we're able to accept. And that's how Avnei explains. He says there's a chiluk between the Mechilta that says you can't accept Gerim because there it doesn't show any contrition, it doesn't show that they're changing their stripes b'chal. To the Rambam, where the Rambam says you could accept it. Now, so what we need to figure out is, do we have anything from this Avnei to our kasha? The Gemara Gittin says, is it possible that we have the Avnei Nezer's Geras to work with? Now, at face value, not, right? Because in order to learn Torah, it's not a Ger Toshav. It has to be a real Ger. It has to really do a complete Geras. Now, complete Geras, the Avnei Nezer says, is no good. So, I want to point your attention to a Taisvis in Yivamis that maybe helps us over here. There's a Gemara in Yivamis on Daf Chotal Amud Beis that says as follows. It's a famous Gemara. The Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, Shehayrim Nechemya Omer, Echad Geri Aroyis, Echad Geri Chalaymis, Echad Geri Mordechai V'Ester, Einon Geri Natchi's Geri B'Zman Hazeh. All these categories of Gerim, Geri Chalaymis, Geri Aroyis, the Gerim who came in the days of Mordechai and Esther, they're not Gerim until the Megai B'Zman Hazeh. In fact, the Gemara B'Zman Hazeh, it's hundreds of years ago, it's thousands of years ago, it's over and done. What does it mean Megai B'Zman Hazeh? Elaim Akib B'Zman Hazeh. They have to have shown a real sincerity as if it's B'Zman Hazeh. That's what it says. This is the Gemara says. Now the Gemara, the Taisus over here has a kasha, and Taisus says as follows. Taisus says, I don't understand. Taisus says, by the Gevainim B'mei David, it says, Nitaisu Geir Ma'Yisrael Kufnun Elef. By the Megillah, it says, V'rab Me'ameoretz Misyadin. Meaning, if you're telling me the Gemara in Yivamis is saying we don't accept Geiros at these times, right? Mordechai Esther, David, Shleima, times in Klal Yisrael was very successful. What is all these Geiros in about? They became Niskairu on their own. No one really accepted them. They really wanted to become Gerim. They became Gerim on their own. Now, this itself is probably a teretz to the Mechiltas Kasha from Gittin, as you could just simply say that they became Gerim on their own. And the Manas Alevi, B'Shlem Al-Chabitz, in deep into the Sefer, does say this. He says they became Gerim on their own. That's how they became Gerim. But there's possibly another angle in here, the Avnei Nezer's angle, that's as follows. Is that if at a time when Klal Yisrael's mamish being shaylit and just was very successful and just had a battle and won, and these people come with humility and deference and say, even though you don't want me, even though you're not accepting, even though the Geirish shop is closed, I'm still coming to be Megayer, which means they're going to get no preference. They're not going to get the kids into school. They're not getting shidduchim. There's nothing happening to them, right? Meaning the Geirish business is closed. They're going to get nothing from it, and even so, they come in shul too. It could be that's a way that you have the Avnei Nezer by a real Geirish. That's not I saw someone suggest this. It's an interesting idea. Maybe that's a way to have the Avnei Nezer by a real Geirus. Meaning you have like a two-step process. They come at a time when it's so not advantageous and so not zugestalt that no one's working to make it easier for them, and still you come. So if I says you're willing to submit yourself and to shtaltzu, in that case, maybe later on, retroactively, we could we do accept the Geirus. Now there are many more roots into this kasha. I'm not going to go into all of them. If you want, take a look at the Sefer Ner Lameya, Idich Perusha Zil Gemar. I've heard the Purim to be continued.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.